I'm the co-chair of the BOLT chapter of the National Lawyers Guild, and I'd like to welcome our panelists. First, immediately to my left is Professor John Sims, who is Professor of Law at the University of the Pacific McGeorge School of Law. Next, we have Professor Alan Wiener, who is Professor of International Law at Stanford. Next is Professor Gauri Ramachandran, who is a visiting professor of constitutional law here at BOLT, and Professor John Steele, who is an instructor of ethics at BOLT, but not this semester, or has been an instructor of ethics at BOLT. Please, you can look more in the handouts we gave you for details on their bios. They each have different angles of expertise on the torture memos. Just to save time, we're going to get right into the discussion. And the first question for the panelists is if you could talk about why, as citizens and as law students, why should we be concerned about the torture memos and accountability for their authors?
Thanks. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be back here at BOLT. I've been here for a number of events like this. My wife is a BOLT grad, so I come here sometimes to those events. And actually, the fall of 2001, I was teaching administrative law here just as a fill-in, so I drive down here a couple days a week. So I taught here on September 10th, and then I taught here on September 12th. But September 11th was a Tuesday, and that, of course, changed everything and set in motion the processes that we're talking about today. I brought along some law journals. I think the student organizers have done a great job on this, and they've got a number of other events set up for next week. One of them involves Kathleen Clark, who teaches at Washington University in St. Louis, and George Harris, who used to be one of my colleagues at McGeorge, who's now back at Morrison & Foerster. And they each have articles about the lawyer's role in the torture memos. It's in the law journal that I do a lot of work on, called the Journal of National Security Law and Policy. So I had an extra box of these issues sitting around, so I brought them along. So there's some up here and there's some in back. They're just free to take if you'd like them. There are a bunch of other substantive articles, not just about the lawyers, but also about torture itself. We have experts who are going to talk about this from the point of view of international law, constitutional law, professional responsibility law. So I thought what I would do is take a couple minutes and describe this as a problem in terms of decision-making in the sphere of national security law. I teach national security law, which is in some ways an overlap of these other disciplines that are relevant today. Let me just say, structurally, the whole problem really starts with the Convention Against Torture. Because the U.S. Eventually became a party to that after some delays in 1994. And one of the provisions of the Torture Convention requires that every state that's a party make all acts of torture violations of its domestic law. And so the U.S. did that in a way. We said that in the statute, which is the statute that's referenced in the title of the torture memo, 18 U.S.C. sections 2340 and 2340A, the statute actually says all torture outside the United States is a crime and provides for punishment. Of course, the torture that we're talking about here did take place outside the United States. And of course, we have a lot of photos here from Abu Ghraib, at least my view would be that the most systematic torture took place not at Abu Ghraib or at Guantanamo, but rather at the so-called CIA black sites, the places in Thailand, Romania, Poland, not totally disclosed even at this point, that's where the waterboarding took place, not at Guantanamo or Abu Ghraib. U.S. has a statute that makes torture a crime if it takes place outside the U.S., and I think that's what sets up these memos, because the CIA people say, wait a second, we're supposed to waterboard Abu Zubaydah, and we might get prosecuted. And the response is, oh no, you're not going to get prosecuted. But then they imagine that at some point there might be a change of administration, or there might be a change of policy. And that sets up the perceived need to have some piece of paper that basically says what the torture memo says, which is, don't worry, you're not going to get prosecuted. You can't validly be prosecuted for following the president's order to torture. I'll just say a word about waterboarding. I mean, you see it described in the newspapers all the time as simulated drowning, which doesn't sound that bad. I think a more accurate description would be an interrupted asphyxiation. That is, that the cloth is used as a barrier to stop the breathing. So the cloth is moistened so that the air can't move across the cloth, and so the victim can't breathe. And that, of course, induces the panic reaction that is so natural to us under those circumstances. And then, of course, that process can be interrupted at any point by the perpetrator. And then, because there isn't any violence of cutting or burning that's been involved, assuming the person doesn't have a heart attack, and of course this is typically being monitored by doctors, then it can just be repeated. And that's how it could happen, that somebody can be waterboarded dozens or even hundreds of times. So it's much more violent practice than simulated anything makes it sound. As a matter of decision making, who made this decision? Well, there was a war council that was no official title, but that was what was operating within the Bush administration at the relevant time period. It involved 5 people. The Attorney General, the White House counsel, Alberto Gonzales, David Addington, who was the counsel to the Vice President Cheney, Tim Flanagan, who was the deputy to the Attorney General, John Yoo, and Will Haynes, who was the General Counsel of the Department of Defense. Bybee is referred to up here as being the main author. I don't think he was. I think he was the nominal supervisor who really wasn't involved at all, and just was lucky because he got out and got a life tenured appointment before the Abu Ghraib scandal broke and the torture memo was released. I think part of this really relates to the power of the Vice President and the power of Addington as his spokesperson. President Cheney, there's a book about him that just came out, and it turns out that Karl Rove used to refer to Vice President Cheney as management. The type of phrase would be, well, you'll have to check with management before you go ahead on that, to show his extraordinary power. And Addington is one of the most knowledgeable and energetic and just ferocious advocates. And so he could run roughshod over anybody that got in the way. And of course, the reality that we will be exploring is that John Yoo didn't get in the way. He believed in a very extreme view of executive power, and so it became very convenient to have somebody with very good legal credentials, a great resume, to sign pieces of paper that said what this memo said, and then be able to show that to the CIA and say, don't worry. So as the substantive summary, Jack Goldsmith, who was the successor to Bybee in the Office of Legal Counsel, didn't stay very long because he had a lot of problems with the opinions that had been written, and is now teaching at Harvard. He wrote a book about the terror presidency. Let me just read you one short paragraph in which he describes the message sent out by the torture memo. And it's like 3 layers to it. 1, violent acts aren't necessarily torture. 2, if you do torture, you probably have a defense.